Hello, and welcome to a bonus episode of Outdoorsy. I'm your host, Madeline. This podcast is all about redefining what the term outdoorsy means and reclaiming it for everyone. I want you to leave this podcast always feeling empowered and like you belong in the outdoors because you do. Today, I'm not interviewing anybody. Usually, I have on amazing guests and we chit chat about the outdoorsy identity and what that means to them. But today, I want to talk to you about something pretty urgent and pretty important. So, in 4 days, actually, the comment period closes for any kind of public comment on the regulations.gov website about their proposal to rescind the roadless rule. I'm going to go into exactly what the roadless rule is, what it means, what it protects, why the USDA is proposing to remove it and rescind it, what this public comment period means, how you can make an impact, actually leave an effective comment, and kind of myth bust some of the misconceptions and misunderstandings about this particular regulation. So it's a whole lot of stuff. It's a meaty episode. I have published little bits and pieces of all of this information in this podcast already on my social media and cute little infographics that are a little bit easier to digest. But I understand that sometimes it's nicer to just sit down and listen to a podcast episode or watch a YouTube video essay. I don't know. However you want to consume this content, I've basically made it available for you. So if you leave this video, this episode with one thing, with one takeaway, the number one thing I want you to do is to just go to regulations.gov, G-O-V, and search for the regulation number. It's called a docket. FS 2025 0001, and you will find the proposal to draft an environmental impact statement around the roadless rule. So I'll go into exactly what that means. What do you mean an environmental impact statement? But basically, the number one thing you can do right this second is to go there and leave a public comment. And the best public comments are ones that are personal, well-researched, and touch on things that you want them to consider. And when I say them, I mean the USDA. You want them to consider and think about as they are drafting up the EIS and as they are reconsidering the roadless rule. So there's a long process that I'll go into a little bit more in depth here and later in the podcast of what the rulemaking process actually looks like. And there will be another comment period eventually, but right now, the best thing you can do is to share your unique experience and share any kind of research or data or considerations you want them to take into account as they draft up this initial proposal. So I, for example, talked about how there's a lot of myths that are just debunked with common research that's available publicly about the roadless rule and its impact on wildfire management and things like that. So I asked them to reconsider some of the research that's already been published there. And I also talked about how roads don't mean accessibility, about as a disabled person, as somebody who has built community for disabled people, I have noticed that oftentimes people like to talk about roads as if they equate accessibility for disabled folks, but it's just not true. And as somebody who has spent hours and hours and hours on our public lands, navigating our forest roads, I understand that more roads does not mean more access to anybody, not just disabled people. So that's kind of the direction I went with my particular comment, because the USDA did use recreation access and access for disabled people as part of the rationale to propose to rescind this rule. So I wanted to touch on that and share that piece. So whatever you think you could add to really incorporate unique viewpoints into this draft proposal, any research you can point back to, that's the best thing you can do. So go and do that. And if you're listening to me ramble on about what you can do to help and you're like, Madeline, can you please explain what the hell is happening in the first place? I will get to that. I promise. I just wanted to start with the call to action because I know sometimes I only have your attention for a couple of minutes, and that's the most important takeaway I want you to have from this. So without further ado, let's get into exactly what is going on, what it means, and how you can help. So if you're like, what the heck is the roadless rule? It sounds good, but I don't know what it means. Don't worry. I actually had no idea what it was until the USDA came out and said, hey, we're going to roll this back. I was like, oh, I've never heard of this. Let me take a peek. And it's actually surprising that I hadn't heard of it because it's been around forever. And forever, I mean, it came to be a regulation in 2001. So in 2001, this regulation, different from a law, and I'll get into the nuance there, but this regulation called the Roadless Rule was proposed and put into action. And it's a conservation regulation that basically protects 58 million acres or so from further development. It mostly protects national forest land. It counts for about 30% of our national forests. So a huge chunk of our national forests are protected under the roadless rule. And basically what it does is it says, hey, in these areas, 30% of the national forest, you cannot build any new industrial roads for logging, for mining, for any kind of like industry. There's exceptions that they allow for, such as, necessary roads for search and rescue, for emergency response, for wildfire management, and that kind of thing. But basically, for any kind of like industry, you cannot build new roads here. And the reason why is primarily conservation. It's to make sure that we do have some untouched wild areas that really do foster and protect our biodiversity, our clean water, and all sorts of other things. So it's really critical. And it's been in place since 2001, which is incredible. And it's done wonders to protect areas that otherwise wouldn't have been protected. What has happened is that under this new administration, they have been talking a lot about, quote unquote, unleashing America's potential and America's energy production and really just making the most out of every square inch of America. We saw this firsthand with Mike Lee's sell-off amendment on the Big Beautiful Bill. He had proposed taking millions of acres of public land and selling them off to private sellers because he was like, well, it's just sitting there useless. We might as well make money off of it. Luckily, we spoke up, we used our voices, and we got that amendment removed from the Big Beautiful Bill. But it's the same kind of mentality of like, well, we've got all this space, all this land. Like, why are we not using it? Like, I don't understand. Let's maximize America. And it may seem well intended at first, but ultimately it's incredibly destructive and incredibly detrimental to not only like wildlife and our forests themselves, but also all the benefits we get from that. The interesting thing is the USDA has looked at this roadless rule and they said that's something we can take away so that we can maximize, our economy, we can maximize recreation, we can do all these things. But they have used arguments in their statements that are contradictory and just honestly not true. So I want to go through and like myth bust some of them with you and kind of talk about what they're saying versus the reality, because it's really misleading how they have framed it and how they are framing the quote unquote benefits from the rescission of this rule. Ultimately, it's going to be really damaging if they remove it. So we need to really make a difference right now when we do have a public comment period, which is like so rare to actually have an opportunity to have our voices directly heard by our government and really prove to them that like, hey, we're paying attention to this thing. We've done it once with the sell-off amendment. We can do it again. I am totally confident that we can do that. So basically, the repeal process looks a little bit different for this regulation than it normally does for other regulations. So to be really clear, like this is not a law, this is a regulation. So it does not require an act of Congress to repeal it or remove it or change it at all. So that makes it a little bit different. And that's why the call to action for a public comment is so important, because a lot of people will think like, oh, I just need to call my congressperson. I just need to call my lawmakers and make a fuss about it. It's like, no, that's not quite how this process is going to work right now. So the most effective action you can take is leaving a public comment. So usually what happens is an agency like the USDA will publish a notice of proposed rulemaking, and that will be available to see in the Federal Register. And it opens up this like public comment period. Then they draft a rule after reviewing the comments. And then sometimes there's like a second round of public comments, and then they finalize the rule. It's slightly different for the roadless rule. So the USDA is basically, first they've published a notice of intent. So on August 29th, they published a notice of intent that basically said they plan on preparing an environmental impact statement, which is what is required under all the rules and regulations of this. That notice of intent automatically opened up a public comment period. And usually public comment periods can be 60 to 90 days, they only open up this public comment period for 21 days, which to me sends off alarm bells. Like, okay, so you guys are really trying to expedite this and trying to get this under the radar. Let's maybe investigate this a little bit more and figure out why you're trying to rush this so hard. So after this comment period closes on September 19th, then they go into a drafting period where they draft up their environmental impact statement and they draft up what they want to be done with the regulation. So that's why during this comment period, it's really important that we raise concerns that we want included and considered in the EIS and the draft ruling. So stuff like ecological impacts, wildfire risks, indigenous land use, those kinds of things that we want to have considered, super important to bring them up then. So then if you go into the notice of intent that they published, they said that they're going to have this public comment period, then they're going to go into the drafting phase, and then they plan to publish their proposed rule and EIS in March of 2026. You know, it's a while, but we got to keep on it, right? So they will publish that, and then we will have a chance to review it. And then there will be a second comment period. Again, I don't know how long the second comment period will be, but we'll keep you guys posted and updated on when that happens. But usually at this point, this is when it's really important for like industry experts to chime in the public comments, because there will be more in-depth information available in the draft and in the EIS that people can actually like really sink their teeth into. So I would highly encourage when that happens, take a look, especially if you're somebody with industry experience, to really pay attention to this moment. Then after they publish that, we have an opportunity to leave public comments. Again, we can flag any like issues, any discrepancies, anything that came up in the other public comment period that hasn't been addressed. And then it will go into like finalization time. I'm sure there's like a technical term for that, but it'll go into like the final ruling basically. And at that point, the rule could be fully repealed. It could be edited and amended. So maybe they're not going to rescind it entirely, but they're going to make some critical changes to it. Or it could remain the same. So like proposing a no action resolution is also something that I would encourage you to bring up in your public comment. It's just saying like, hey, what if we just left it the same? Why are we doing this? Let's just not touch it. It's working fine. So yeah, then it's kind of like final. There's not much the public can do to change things after that. But that is the time where environmental agencies and organizations can come in, like Earth Justice or other orgs can come and they can push back legally and say, you know, you have not done your due diligence here, or this is going to cause this detrimental impact, therefore we are suing you. Like there can be certain legal arguments that can be made at that point. So again, that's why it's really important that we really speak up during these two comment periods and raise our concerns and bring up any kind of valid points or research that needs to be considered, because in order to pursue legal action, if they just decide to ignore all of those things, is that all of those public comments become part of the public record. And so these organizations can point to those public comments and say, you know, you guys did not consider this important thing that 100,000 people brought up in their public comments. This is negligent, you know, and so they can point to that. That's why it's so important for people to leave those public comments, becomes part of public record. So right now, we are in that public comment period. If you're listening to this episode when it comes out, we've only got a few days left until the September 19th deadline rolls around for the first comment period. If you're listening to this after that time period, don't worry. Again, there's going to be a second comment period in March, hopefully. And ideally, this rule isn't going to be finalized, put into place until late 2026. So we've got a long road ahead, but ultimately right now, if you're listening to it right now before September 19th, the number one thing you can do is go leave a public comment. Again, you can go to regulations.gov and search for FS-2025-0001 and leave your public comment. There's also a link in the show notes or in the YouTube description, depending on where you are watching this episode. So you can just click through there too. So before I get into talking about exactly how to leave a strong public comment, because that's super important, I do want to talk about the Roadless Rule itself and some of the misconceptions that the USDA is perpetuating and misunderstandings that some people are having about this rule. So I've spent a lot of time going through the actual documentation itself, but also a lot of the comments that have already been made from people that are in favor of rescinding the roadless rule to really understand like why do people want this? Why do people want to repeal one of the most effective conservation regulations that's been in place for 25 years? Like why would this be something that people don't want? I just don't understand. And one of the main things is this idea that roadless areas are inaccessible and useless and not benefiting the American people at all. So they kind of paint it as like bursting with untapped value. The other thing that they are framing it as is also a danger, like a danger to public safety, a danger to our forest health. And their talking points sound reasonable when you consume them in a vacuum like this. You would think like, oh, yeah, I guess we do need more roads to manage wildfires, right? That makes sense logically. Shouldn't we have more roads for people with forest jobs? Wouldn't that open up more opportunities? Wouldn't new roads make it easier for disabled people to access the outdoors? Like, again, these things make sense on the surface. But when you actually start diving into the reality of them and going beyond just that initial statement and understanding like the research behind it, it becomes very clear that those are just kind of romantic ideas and not reality. Let me get into it. Basically, the roadless rule is not just like locking up public land for people. Like it is not just like literally setting up gates and saying no roads beyond this point, nobody can come in here. It's not just an arbitrary limit to the land people can access, especially when we think about our public lands. We think like, oh, those belong to all of us. Why would we not be able to have roads there and access them? And that's not what the roadless rule does at all. It does not limit access. It does not limit, recreation. It's just specific types of access and specific types of exploitation. It protects our forests. It protects a ton of different things. And I'll get into like the actual specifics here in a second. But what it does is basically it just protects these areas from reckless industry, from reckless exploitation, like logging, mining, building, and that kind of thing. So it's really important that you keep in mind this is not just like locking up your public lands for you to not be able to use. No, no, no. It's doing a lot for us. So the first thing that seems to be a common misunderstanding is around wildfire management. The USDA specifically has talked about how roads are critical for wildfire management. They have the argument that, more roads will provide more access to the people that actually fight these wildfires to be able to participate in forest management practices that help reduce the risk of wildfires, yada, yada, yada. But the truth is if you actually dive into the research behind roads and wildfires, you'll find that this just isn't true. It's an argument that just doesn't hold up. First of all, the roadless rule does allow for road building for wildfire management. So like that's just it does allow exceptions. But I also want to talk about, roads do introduce a lot more risk into these areas. It doesn't just like automatically mean these areas are more protected from wildfires or stop wildfires. Wildfires start 4 times more often near roads than not near roads. 4 times. And 90% of wildfires start within a half mile of a road. If that's not a clear correlation, I don't know what is. Because, you think about it logically, like, oh, yeah, I guess, cars can crash and they can cause fires, or like sparks from chains underneath cars can, cause fires to ignite and stuff. But that's actually not really like the real reason why. The real reason why is more roads equal more humans. And 85% of wildfires are caused by humans. 85! That is just mind blowing. So more roads equaling more humans equals more wildfires. It's basic math. And if you are someone like me who has spent time traversing down forest roads, you've seen this firsthand. I've seen so many fires not put out. Like people just leave their fire rings burning and smoldering. It is crazy. The amount of firework casings I have seen is wild. People are really poorly behaved in our national forests. And I really do think that if you have spent any time down a forest road, you've seen this too, and you know how it goes. Even just cigarette butts can ignite a fire. So, more roads equals more people equals more wildfires. Again, the other interesting piece here, as I was digging into some research, is native plants actually are more wildfire resistant, right? So, non native plants and invasive plants actually are more, oh my gosh, I can't speak, are more, help. Non-native plants and invasive species are more susceptible to wildfires. So they are more inflammatory, they are more likely to not prevent against wildfires, and non-native plants are 2 times more likely to be found within 500 feet of a road. So again, roads causing all sorts of issues. This argument is just it just doesn't hold up when you start digging into the research. Now, the other argument that the people in opposition to the roadless rule have is like our roadless areas are just locked up public land. They're just useless. They don't do anything. We might as well make the most of them. But these forests are not useless. They provide so much value. So I was looking into like exactly what they protect, and one of the most important things that the roadless areas protect is clean drinking water. So the 58 million acres of roadless areas provide drinking water to 180 million Americans. Hello? Like that is so much. There's a lot of really interesting research about like how cars on roads kick up sediment and can impact the quality of drinking water in certain areas. I would highly encourage you go check that out if you want to learn more. I am no water quality expert, but I do think that it's really, really, really important for us to consider the fact that it's protecting clean water access for 180 million people. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. The other thing that this does is it protects wildlife habitats. So I feel like sometimes when we're talking about these conservation efforts, people tend to tune out when it comes to impacting humans, which I don't know. Like sometimes I get more sad when I'm watching a movie where the dog dies than when a person dies. So I guess I get it. But one of the really important things that these roadless areas does is protect wildlife habitats. So if we look at salmon, if we look at grizzlies, if we look at owls, all sorts of different species that live in these areas, the roadless rule does protect their natural habitats and are really, really critical to not be adding in any additional roads or industry because it can not only disrupt their habitats, but also their migration patterns. And that, as we know, is extremely detrimental to holistic life cycles and ecosystems. So we want to make sure that we continue to protect and preserve those habitats. But if you're interested in learning more, definitely dig into some of the sources I have linked in my blog post about this. The roadless rule protects 58 million acres of land, right? And the Forest Service, this is all Forest Service acreage. The Forest Service right now currently has 386,000 miles of forest road already. They have a maintenance backlog of $8.4 billion right now. So, why would they want to add in nearly 60 million additional acres to have to manage and protect when they can't even do what they need to do on the other roads, other forests, and we're experiencing record staffing shortages and funding cuts. They're understaffed, they're under-resourced, they're already facing an $8.4 billion maintenance backlog. Why are we adding more acreage for them to be managing? I don't see how that would ever result in safer, more accessible, or better land management practices. If anything, it's just going to cause more chaos, more deficit, and yeah, it's just not good. So like let's not add more to their plate. The other really big argument that I'm hearing online from people who support the rescission of the roadless rule is that, oh, if we remove the roadless rule, we'll have access to 30% more of our national forest. Of course we want to rescind it. We deserve that access. We need that access, not only for disabled individuals, but for people who enjoy hiking, hunting, fishing, camping, etc. But I need to be so crystal clear with everybody who thinks that way. Roads do not equal accessibility. Let me say it again. Roads do not equal accessibility. Accessibility to people with disabilities, accessibility to everybody else. Simply allowing roads to be built does not mean that there's suddenly going to be beautifully paved roads that are accessible for civilian vehicles. It could literally just mean really rough and tumble logging roads that are literally closed off for public access. It could mean that the roads that are built are only for ATVs and for 4x4s. I don't know about you, but when I'm hiking in the wilderness, especially when I'm in our national forest, I don't want to hear a bunch of off road vehicles constantly. I don't want to see them. You have over 300,000 additional forest roads to go ride your dirt bikes on. Like, please go use those. You don't need even more. We need to have certain areas that are protected and quiet and peaceful, not only for the habitat perspective, but also for just general enjoyment. So, like, that's the other thing that I don't think people are understanding is that the roadless rule does not like close off access to trails. If you go onto any of the maps that have been created that are mapping out where roadless areas are, they actually intersect, protect, and like overlap with a ton of very popular trails. I made an Instagram post if you want to go look that pulled out all of the really popular areas in Washington state that it protects. There's so many incredibly popular trails that are considered under the roadless rule protection. Now, if that roadless rule is then rescinded, all of those trails, all of that access that we currently have could just go away. And even if somehow the trails are maintained and preserved and the access doesn't go away to them because of new logging and mining operations, you have to think about the actual experience of recreating in those areas. So, like, there's a ton of roadless areas in the North Cascades along the Highway 20 route. If you were to go to any of those hikes, like let's consider Maple Pass Loop, that's one of the most popular hikes in the state. Imagine going on that hike and hearing nonstop noise from roads, from loggers, from ATVs, and then looking out over these beautiful, breathtaking landscapes that are currently these beautiful forested areas and seeing nothing but roads and cut down trees. So, sure, maybe you still have access to that trail, but the experience of being on that trail is not going to be the same anymore. And that's the future that we're looking at if we just remove these protections. I don't think people are really understanding the reality of this because, again, like opening up 30% of our national forests, that have been previously locked up, it sounds like such a good idea. It sounds romantic. It sounds lovely. It's not reality. You're not just like suddenly going to have beautiful trails and roads and all this stuff. No, those areas are just going to be exploited and they're going to ruin the existing recreation access we currently have. I need everybody to like really hear that. It's so important to talk about and to remember. The other piece I want to touch on is this concept that more roads means more accessibility for disabled people. And I just it's very interesting to me how often disabled people are used as a scapegoat for shitty policy making when in reality if this administration cared about disabled people at all, they would be doing so many other things differently. So it's incredibly frustrating and I will get a little bit heated when I talk about this because they do not care about disabled people. And if they did, they would understand that simply adding more roads does not equate to more accessibility specifically for disabled people. I'll put a picture up on the screen if you're watching the video episode of what true accessibility looks like in the outdoors. It's not just roads, because if you add roads, cool, okay, I can drive down this road. Then what? Is there an accessible bathroom? Probably not. Is there an accessible trail? Guarantee you there's not. If we look at our national parks, for example, they are one of the most like accessible outdoor areas that we have in the United States. They're like used as a great example of, wow, these are places that are built for inclusion. They are built for everybody. I hate to break it to you, but only 15% of the trails are actually accessible for people in wheelchairs. 15%. And our national parks have so many roads, the most roads out of any other public areas. So I am not understanding why people think that suddenly more roads equals more accessibility because it simply does not. I think people really need to think about what accessibility and inclusion actually means. And that means having accessible bathrooms. It means having wide, paved, or at least extremely well maintained trails, which, with the lack of funding to our National Forest Service and to all the other agencies that support the maintenance of trails, how do we think that those trails get cleared from downed trees, from debris that's blocking the way? They don't. And that's part of why right now we need to focus on improving our existing infrastructure rather than developing new infrastructure that's like half assed. So instead of saying, oh, we're going to build all these new roads and it's going to be so accessible for disabled people, hey, how about we just make more accessible bathrooms at existing trailheads? Or maybe we work on providing better funding to the staff so that they can clear downed logs after crazy windstorms and make sure that these trails that do exist that are accessible for people in wheelchairs can be cleared. Like, I just don't understand why people are not able to grasp this, but I do think that it's because either they've never been disabled themselves or they don't know a single disabled person. And I think that is the crux of the issue is people are not surrounded by diversity and so they don't hear these stories. But it's important to understand what the actual experience is for a disabled person to get into the outdoors. Like I had to talk about my experiences as a disabled person all the time on here. And it's been really frustrating as somebody who has been really struggling with the way in which my disabilities have limited my ability to enjoy the outdoors over the last 2.5 years, specifically with my arthritis. Like, I'm not even like in a wheelchair. I don't need mobility aids. And even still, I am really struggling to find places in the outdoors that are accessible for me as it is. And I have access to so much in the Pacific Northwest. And even still, it's a struggle. So add on the use of mobility aids, add on the need for accessible bathrooms, add on the need for adequate cell coverage. Like, there's so many additional things that go into accessible infrastructure that they have not even considered or thought about that are not available right now on existing trails. So, like, why would we possibly imagine that they would be available on more? Like, I just anyways, I could talk about this forever. As you can tell, I'm a little bit heated talking about it. But just a few more misconceptions that exist right now. The other one is that the roadless rule would prevent any new roads from being built, and that's just not true. Currently, as it's written today, provides exceptions. So for public safety, for wildfire management, for search and rescue, for emergency services, it allows for road building for environmental reasons like helping mitigate floods, landslides, that kind of thing. And then it also provides exceptions for access to existing like leases, land, tribal rights, that kind of thing. So that's just not true. Like, there are exceptions that exist for the roadless rule. And then the last thing that I'm going to touch on is economic value. As I touched on earlier, economic opportunity was one of the main reasons why Mike Lee originally proposed that giant millions of acres proposal on the Big Beautiful Bill. He thought, oh, this land's just sitting here, quote unquote, unused. We might as well just make the most of it and unleash the potential and economic value that could be made here. We knew that was bullshit. It's also bullshit here in the roadless rule. Removing the roadless rule is not going to benefit the US economy. It's just not. Even if you think that there's like a lot of untapped potential economic value in logging and potential industry, it's not going to outweigh the current economic value. So let me just read you a couple of stats. Roadless areas generate $2 to $3 billion a year in recreation, clean water, and carbon storage. That's a lot. That's a lot of money. New Mexico alone, their roadless areas bring in $90 million a year and about 1,000 jobs. Colorado roadless areas are about $60 million a year. Nearby home values around roadless areas rise 5.6%. And yeah, there's just like, there's so much economic value that's already happening. They're not just like these untouched, useless areas. They're providing value as is. We don't need to like extract more out of them. There's not more to be extracted. So like, just leave them as there is, as it is. So all in all, these are the big kind of like myths and misconceptions about the roadless rule that I want people to consider when they are leaving a public comment and to bring up when they're leaving a public comment. Again, the number one thing you can do right now is to go leave a public comment. Go to regulations.gov and search the docket FS 2025 0001. 3 zeros, 1 1. That deadline is September 19th. So please hurry and get your comments in. I want to talk about how to leave a good comment, like what a solid public comment means, because I know a lot of you care and you want to just like do the best that you can. So I will give you some tips and tricks on how to leave a good comment and then some key talking points that you can bring up if you're not really sure where to start. But I do want to just preface this by saying I've gotten a lot of comments on social media from people being like, our public comments are not going to make a difference. This government has proven that they don't listen to us. They don't care what we have to say. They're going to do what they want regardless. And I just want to encourage people to shift their mindset a little bit because of a few reasons. First of all, public comment periods actually do matter. They are taken seriously. They are taken into consideration. The USDA and whatever agency is overseeing said public comment period has to review and consider every single substantial comment. They are legally required to do so. So I know in our brains, we're like rolling our eyes a little bit about, okay, well, the government's also legally required to do a bunch of other things that they're not doing. I understand. I totally hear you. I know why you feel jaded. But the other benefit here is that all of your public comments are then entered into public domain. They become part of public record. So when they release a drafting of this new rule or the rescission next year, and it fails to address all these things that we brought up in their public comments, then that's when organizations can take legal action. They can point to negligence of not considering these public statements. So it is important. Maybe they won't listen to it when they do their initial drafting, but they will listen to it eventually. And it really does matter. I also just want to encourage people to think about this as a very rare opportunity for us to have our voices heard. There are so few opportunities in the rulemaking process and in our legislative process in America where we get to have the opportunity to have our unique, specific individual voice heard beyond just a vote. I think that's like really important to consider. We get to actually say something. And I think that's beautiful. And I think we should really take advantage of that. And if you are still listening to this and you're like, okay, Madeline, like, whatever, think about the public land sell off that we just got removed from the big, beautiful bill. I mean, that thing was really dangerous and they were moving so fast. And we did not have an opportunity to have our voices heard. There was no public comment period. We didn't get to vote. We didn't have a direct line to the rulemaking process. And yet, so many people showed up, called their representatives, wrote their representatives, made noise online. And literally, because of the outcry we made online, we got that thing removed. And that is wild to think about. The power of collective action cannot be ignored. We have so much power in our hands as a collective. We have to work together. So I understand why you feel discouraged. I understand why you feel jaded, why you would think this wouldn't matter. Promise you it does. So do not miss this opportunity to have your voice heard. Please, please, please. I am begging you. Okay, I will get off my soapbox now and talk about exactly how you can leave a good comment. So, one of the things you can do is just introduce yourself. Talk about who you are, what your background is, like why this matters to you. Like I talked about, I've been a resident of Washington State forever. I've grown up in these forests. Like, this is why this is important to me. And then be specific, reference specific myths or specific research or specific points that matter to you in your comment. Use evidence and facts so you can add links into your comment, cite specific research. You can also upload documents. So if you have like a PDF you want to upload, you can do that as well. Tell your story, propose alternatives. That's the other thing too, is like instead of removing the roadless rule, like I, first of all, would like to propose a no action alternative, which is just continuing to keep it as is. Or if you insist on editing the rule, here are the propositions of like things that you could potentially adjust in the rule without removing these protections completely. Like that's super valuable too. But the two things I also want to mention as I've been going through the public comments, because I've gone through a lot of them and I've been trying to read a few every day. Some of the patterns I'm noticing is one is that people don't leave enough information. They just say, please do not rescind the roadless rule, and they hit send. It's good. Like numbers matter, of course. It's certainly important to have a high volume of comments. but it's not just a numbers game. The substance of your comment actually matters. The other thing that I have been noticing is people being like pretty vulgar and pretty rude in their comments, using profanity, cussing out Trump, that kind of thing. Those will not be paid attention to. Like, I think that I can't remember for sure because I've heard conflicting information, but I'm pretty sure that if you use profanity at all, your comment just like automatically gets filtered out. So try to be respectful. I know that we feel really passionate about this. We feel very fired up and we want to let them know how we feel, but we also need to keep the end goal in mind. And the end goal is for them to listen to us and actually make changes. So try your hardest to be respectful. If you want to vent about this, if you want to talk shit about it, you can use my comment section to do that. Like, please like write the comment you wish you could leave in the comment section here. But for your actual public comment, try to make it as respectful as possible. And then the other thing that we're seeing is sometimes people are using AI a little too much to write their comment. I do think that if you're really struggling with a place to start with writing your comment, I am not a huge proponent of using AI. However, I understand it can be a helpful tool for people. So one of the things you can do is you can plug in all of these like different ideas and talking points and things you want to discuss into a tool that can help you write a more meaty and substantial post. But please don't make it like seem like it came from AI. Like, at least do a little bit of editing. I was noticing some people were actually accidentally just copying and pasting without removing their original prompt into their post. You know, you want to be taken seriously and you want them to think like, oh, this was a real person that took the time to leave this comment. So if you must use AI, please use it responsibly and really infuse your own voice and your own story. Okay. The last thing is, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to sound like a scientist or a professor. You can sound like yourself. Obviously, you want to sound professional. You want it to be clear. You want it to be organized, but it doesn't have to be like some super buttoned up academic thing. Like, you can just sound like a human. Don't overthink it. Okay. And then the last thing is, don't ever just copy and paste from somebody. So there's some people that are sharing like scripts for what you can say in your public comment, which is great, but the intention is not for you to just copy and paste that script into your comment and publish the exact same thing. You can use that as a starting point. So you can take that script and then copy and paste it and then edit it and tweak it to add in your personal story and your own perspective. So just never copy and paste, because that doesn't look good. It doesn't reflect good on anybody, and it isn't really helpful to just have a bunch of duplicate comments. And numbers help. Yeah, it's awesome. We're at over 100,000 right now. I think last time I looked, we were at like 119,000, which is incredible. Like, so cool to see. But it really, the substance of your comment is the most important thing. So if you are looking for talking points, go through and look at my blog posts that I have linked, because those are great to kind of like pull from. But ultimately, some of the talking points you can touch on is like the ecological impacts and the impacts to biodiversity, the wildfire impacts, the impacts on recreation, on the economy, and kind of like community, outdoor community, proposing alternatives and other solutions. You can talk about it from an indigenous perspective. But at the bottom line, specificity matters. So just make sure that you're being clear and specific about what you're talking about. I feel out of breath, but maybe that's just because I am 7 months pregnant. Oh my God, 7 months pregnant. So yeah, that's a lot of information. This is a long episode. If you are still with me, I'm amazed. Thank you. Uh, and thank you for caring so much about these things. It is really easy to feel burnt out by these seemingly nonstop attacks on our public lands and just on these things that are really important to us and our well-being, because the outdoors are for everybody and they are so essential for our health and our emotional well-being. And it feels like a personal attack when they are under attack as well. So it can feel really draining. And it feels like we just ran a marathon with the big, beautiful bill. Trust me, I feel like I'm just now starting to kind of recover from the chaos that was. But these smaller things do really matter as well. And I appreciate every single person that has taken the time to engage with any of the posts that are sharing information about this, taking the time to really learn about what's going on and leave thoughtful comments and be engaged in a way that really does matter and really makes an impact. So thank you for continuing to show up for our public lands. I'm so glad there's so many of us that are channeling our inner Lorax. I do want to say I made a promise online, and I promise I still am going to hold on to this promise. Don't worry, but I made a promise where I said if I get 2,000 people to click through the link that I shared to go leave a public comment, that I would dress up as the Lorax for a video. We're at over 11,000 people who have clicked through that link. So I know I have promised this. I will dress up as the Lorax. I've got the costume. It arrived a couple weeks ago. Like, I've got it. I promise I will. Don't worry, that can be your reward for leaving so many amazing public comments. So stay tuned for that video of me humiliating myself. But why I wanted to bring that up is because we so rarely get an opportunity to channel our inner Lorax and speak for the trees. This is one of those opportunities. So it's on all of us to really seize the moment and step up to the plate and leave public comments while we can. This is a huge moment in time, and I just encourage you all to use your voice and speak for the trees because it really matters. If you have questions, if you want more information, if you don't know where to find sources that I've cited, I have a bunch of blog posts. I think I have 3 blog posts that talk about all of this. They're all linked in the show notes and in the description here. And I have a ton of social media content, specifically on my Instagram, that I have put out sharing more of this. So if you want a better way to kind of like remember this and digest this information, it's all there. As a reminder, I am not paid for any of this. So I know that there are organizations that do pay creators to talk about these issues and help move the needle. I am not paid for any of this. I also am not like incentivized in any way. I'm not asked by any organizations to talk about this. I do this all just because I care very, very, very deeply. It is a lot of unpaid labor, though. It is a lot of work to put together these resources for you to research them. I'm happy to do it. I love doing it, and I don't expect anything in return. But if you do want to thank me, if you do want to help me feel like this work is a little bit more sustainable and feel a little bit less burnt out, there are a few different ways that you can help support me and the work that I am doing independently. The first one is you can always just leave me a tip on Venmo. I have my Venmo linked in my like bio and stuff. You can just go leave me a little tip, just like $5 to say thanks. Goes a huge, very long way. Thank you. The other thing you can do is become a Patreon subscriber. So I do have a Patreon that I put out exclusive content onto, but the biggest thing that you get out of joining the Patreon is access to the Discord server. So the outdoorsy community that I've been able to cultivate with your help online has been incredible. And I wanted to create a safe space for us to all congregate and come together online without any algorithms or trolls. So I have a Discord server where we chit chat, share tips and tricks for exploring the great outdoors and getting out in ways that, make sense to us. It's really great. There's lots of cute dog pictures being shared all the time, lots of good gear tips and good hiking trails. We even share some of our like hidden spots that we don't share with anybody else, but we share in this kind of like trusted community. So that's a huge benefit. And then the other benefit of joining the Patreon is you get to gain access to Cozy Camping Club. So I do this like little meetup. We've done one every single month for the past like 4 or 5 months, where it's just like-minded individuals hanging out in the outdoors. And the only way you can find out where those are and when they happen is by joining the Patreon. So you can do that as well. There's a $5 a month entry point and then a $10 a month. And then there's also just like a $3 general support. That doesn't get you access to anything, but if you just want to like give me $3 a month, like just as a general thank you, you can do that as well. And that's very much appreciated. And then finally, the other way you can support is just by donating to any of the causes that I care about. I have a bunch of them linked in my bio and in my blog. One of the big fundraisers that I'm trying to do right now is in lieu of a baby registry, because I've got my baby registry covered by my friends and family and stuff. But a few of you have asked how you can contribute, and I am raising money for the PCRF. So they have been able to give thousands of cans of formula to infants and families in need in Gaza. And even with the current blockades, they've still been able to provide assistance and help. So that's really important to me. So while I appreciate people wanting to contribute to our baby and welcoming her and everything, there are other babies in the world that are much more in need. So if you can donate to the PCRF, that would be Amazing. And then finally, if you are just like Madeline, you just listed off a bunch of things that cost money. I don't have any money. I hear ya. I totally hear ya. The other thing you can do is rate this podcast 5 stars. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can like and subscribe, leave a little comment. Any kind of like visibility action really helps. So, like engagement online, sharing my posts, liking my posts, commenting whenever they pop up. That's totally free for you to do, but really, really helps me get my message out. So, yeah, whatever way you can support is appreciated. Thank you so much. I hope everybody is hanging in there. It's been a really insane year. I don't know even what to say. But just know that I'm in your corner and I'm going to continue to show up and fight for not only our public lands, but for continuing to make the outdoor community more accessible and inclusive for everybody. And I hope that in the meantime, between now and the next time that you see me, you are able to get out into the outdoors in whatever way makes sense to you, feels good to you, and you just remember that you belong out there.